Hi everyone, welcome to day 9 of Mrs. Lamprin's reading group. We're going to continue on with the graduation of Jake Moon. Today we're going to be reading chapter 4, so go ahead and listen up. So, chapter 4, Lucky Duck. He broke his wrists, both of them. But still, there wasn't one person in the emergency room that night who didn't go on and on about Skelly's wonderful luck. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Moon," the emergency room doctor. "You could have broken your neck in the fall like that." "His neck?" said the nurse. "He's lucky he didn't break his back." The X-ray guy was my favorite. He held the pictures of Skelly's 2 shattered wrist bones up to the light and said, "Considering how far you fell, I'd say you've got yourself a couple of lucky breaks here." He cracked up at his own stupid joke. When he looked at me to see if I was laughing too, I wasn't. I mean, excuse me, okay, but for an old man whose biggest joy in life is sanding old furniture, it seems like 2 broken wrists are a pretty huge deal. And if the doctor or nurse or X-ray guy hadn't been so busy yucking it up, maybe they would have noticed that my grandfather hadn't spoken 2 words to any of them. As we rode home in the car, I sat next to Skelly in the back seat. Every time I looked over at him, he was staring at his casts. He never took his eyes off them once, and even days later, long after he should have been used to them, I would walk into the living room and find him sitting in his recliner watching his casts instead of the TV. "Hey, Skel, what's up?" I would say. "Isn't there something you want to watch on the tube?" Then right away, I'd start flipping through the channels trying to find a basketball game or something else that he might like. No matter what I picked for him, it wasn't long before his eyes would drop, and he'd be back staring at those casts again. Dr. Bloomfield wasn't surprised by his gloominess. She said it was common for Alzheimer's patients to get depressed after going through a trauma like this. She even warned us that the disease might start getting worse faster. After a trauma, patients can become so overwhelmed it's almost like they don't have the energy to keep fighting anymore, she told us. To try and lift his spirits, my mother and my aunt took him on picnics on the weekends. Other times, me and Ma would take him to the movies or out for ice cream. But regardless of what we did, the minute Skelly hit the door, he'd head straight for his recliner or to his bed. To their credit, Ma and Marguerite didn't give up. In fact, the week before his cast finally came off, my aunt brought him a small burlap sack with a big ribbon tied around it. Inside were packages of flower seeds, all of Skel's favorite. She hurried into his room and woke him up. "Look, Dad, flower seeds. See them? Pansies, popsies, morning glories. I know it's still too cool to plant them outside, but I bought everything you need to get them started inside. Fluorescent bulbs, potting soil. It's all in the kitchen. You can grow them from seeds and then transplant them into your garden as soon as it warms up." She showed him the picture of the flowers. "Just a few more weeks and you'll be out there with your trowel digging in the garden just like always." Skelly's eyes filled with tears. We thought it was because he was so happy that his problems were almost over. But the next day when I got up, I found the bag of flower seeds in the kitchen trash, where he'd dumped them during the night. Ma tried to shrug it off. "It was just too soon for him to think about all that," she said. "You mark my words, Jake, as soon as those casts come off, he'll be rarin' to get started." But 1 week later, when the casts did come off, Skelly was more worried about his wrist than ever. At dinner the first night, he wouldn't even carry a plate of spaghetti to the table. He said it was too heavy. And at breakfast the next morning, he had both wrists wrapped up in brown socks, which was just plain disturbing. That afternoon I dug out his old baseball glove from his closet and told him I'd like to have a catch. It just seemed like a good way to ease him back into using his hands again, I thought. "Come on, Skel, it'll be fun," I said. "We'll take it totally easy, I promise." At first, Skelly examined the glove, like he was trying to figure out what it was. But when he finally looked up at me from his chair, his expression turned sour. "Catch? Exactly how am I supposed to play catch?" he said, the word like it was a bad taste in his mouth. Then he threw the glove on the floor and stood up. The next thing I know, he was flailing his wrist in my face. "How am I supposed to do anything at all with these bones as weak as these? Huh? Tell me that. Will you? How am I going to do anything ever again?" As he turned and left the room, I heard him mutter, "Catch, for Christ's sake!" Skelly had never sworn around me before. Never. Once in my whole life, with tears running down my face, I picked up his glove and took it outside. Then I lifted the lid of the trash can and slammed it straight to the bottom. 4 months after his accident, I woke Skelly up for dinner one night, and he asked who I was. He said it like it was a joke almost. He'd been asleep on his bed, and when I tapped him awake, he said, "Who you?" "Yeah, right. Real funny, Skell. Ma says the pot roast is ready, okay? Can you smell it?" He squinted his eyes and said to my face. That's when I knew that he wasn't joking. He didn't have a clue who I was. There's no way to describe how terrible that made me feel inside, except to say that it's never totally gone away. And even though there were still times after that when Skelly knew me perfectly well, it became more and more common for me to walk into his room and have him totally baffled. Over time, Skelly finally settled on the idea that I was Claude Harper, his best friend from when he was a kid, and now, through the magic of Alzheimer's, I'm his best friend once again. After my grandfather's accident, Ma took a leave of absence from work to stay with him for a few weeks. Then my Aunt Marguerite stayed with him some too. But eventually both of them had to go back to work, and they hired a full-time caregiver. A caregiver is a person who takes care of sick people. The caregiver doesn't have to be a nurse, but ours was. Ours was a registered nurse named Lana. The reason I know she was a registered is that it was physically impossible for Lana to say I am a nurse without adding the registered part. Like anyone even knows what that even means. My mother's work schedule had changed again. She'd gotten a promotion and was needed in the office in the morning. So for a long time, Lana came at 9 and stayed till Ma got home at 4:30. But by the middle of 5th grade year, Lana started having problems with her daughter Vanna. And from then on, she needed to leave our house at 3:30 sharp. She said to pick up Vanna from school. Ma tried to hire someone to watch Skelly from 3:30 to 4:30, but no one was interested. So finally, I offered to fill in for a while. It didn't seem like it would be a big deal, really. Most of the time, I just came home from school and watched TV anyway. And Skelly was almost always asleep in his recliner. So how much of a pain could it be? I thought. At first, the answer was none at all. In fact, for the first month or so, it seemed like nothing had even changed. But pretty soon, stuff started coming up after school that I had to miss, and I began to resent it. It didn't help that Skelly's behavior kept getting weirder and weirder, either. For one thing, he began roaming around in the middle of the night. Ma installed deadbolts and bells on the outside doors to keep him from wandering away. But none of that stopped him from scuffling from room to room at 3 in the morning, turning on lights. Also, he began hoarding stuff from the kitchen. There were nights when I woke up, I would hear him knocking around in the dark, and when I got up, I'd find him carrying cans of soup and vegetables down the hall to his room. He'd line them up all nice and neat on his shelf, just like the cans in the grocery store. When I asked him why, he said he needed to have food in there just in case, whatever that meant. Another thing that got worse was Skelly's repeating. One Sunday, at family dinner night, he set a new world record by asking James and me if we liked llama beans 11 times. On the 12th time, James passed me an imaginary gun under the table and we pretended to shoot ourselves. So far, it's been one of our nicest moments. Anyhow, even with all the confusion at home, I was still managing to have a life at school. Lucas Kearney was still my best friend in 5th grade. So by then, I told him about Skelly's Alzheimer's. Not all the crazy business, I don't mean, but Lucas definitely knew my grandfather wasn't all there. A couple of times a week, usually, Lucas would come over after school and we'd shoot hoops in my side yard. We almost always stayed outside while Skelly napped in the living room, but once in a while, we'd go into the kitchen for a drink of water. And on one of those trips, Skelly woke up and came wandering in to join us. His hair was all wild and fuzzy looking from the recliner, and he was only wearing one shoe. As soon as he saw Lucas, he pointed his finger, told him to zipper his brisket. I froze in embarrassment. Meanwhile, Lucas started backing up like a psycho had just entered the room. Finally, I managed to grab Lucas by the arm and steer him out of the door. Jacket, I said as soon as we got outside. He meant to zipper your jacket. That's just the Alzheimer's. Keeps erasing words from his vocabulary, and when he can't remember the right name for something, he substitutes it with something else. Lucas rolled his eyes. Then why didn't he just tell me to zipper my coat? I mean, God, Moon, a brisket is like a huge hunk of meat or something. I started getting defensive. So, what do you want me to do, Lucas? Do you want me to figure out a way for this stupid disease to make sense to you? That's just the way it is, okay? After that came this awkward kind of silence. Lucas grabbed the ball and started shooting again. So, I said finally, so what? So are you just going to zipper your brisket or not? Lucas laughed a little and zipped up. There. Now, is everyone happy? Things got back to normal after that. But a couple of weeks later, when Lucas went inside to get another drink, Skelly called him Sylvia. From that day on, whenever he got thirsty, Lucas drank from our outside hose. My resentment started to build. I know it was only an hour a day that I had to stay with Skelly, but there turned out to be a big difference between coming home right after school because I wanted to and coming home right after school because I had to. The trouble was, Ma was all the time praising me like I was a saint or something, telling me how generous I was giving Skelly an hour of my day. Plus, she was always saying how she would do everything in her power to keep the rest of my life as normal as possible. Cross my heart and hope to die, Jake, she told me one Saturday morning. I'm going to hang on to normal if it kills me. Then, to show she really meant business, she went down to sign me up for Little League an hour before the doors opened. There were two baseball games a week that spring, plus 3 practices. But Ma insisted that getting me there would be no problem. It's just that Skelly would have to come with us now. Who knows, she said. Maybe getting him outside in the fresh air with all those young ball players might even do him some good. Skelly had always loved baseball. He had played on a senior league till he was 60. I think it was. And we still have the videotape of the time he took me to my first Little League game. It was the same day I took my first steps, actually. Ma said he was so proud of those 5 steps, he ran me straight down to the ball field where there was a game going on. My mother, who's always had a tendency to overtape my life, ran behind him with the video camera. As soon as the little game was over, she filmed Skelly carrying me around the backstop and standing me on the home plate. I fell down twice, but the third time I stood there all by myself for at least 10 seconds before I started to sway. Then, just as I was about to keel over, Skelly came running into the picture, scooped me up into his arms, and zoomed me around the bases for my first home run. Unfortunately, when I played in 5th grade, Ma's wishful thinking about the fresh air being good for Skelly didn't prove to be true. In fact, most of the time, as soon as she'd got him seated on the bleachers at a game, he was ready to go home again. Ma kept on bringing him, though. Whenever he got antsy, she would walk him around the track or the school parking lot. I know it was hard for her, and I know she tried her best. But twice during the season she got busy talking to someone in the stands, and Skelly climbed down and started to walk home by himself. Both times he took a shortcut through the infield in the middle of an inning. The guys on my team started calling him Mr. Magoo after that old man cartoon character with the bad eyesight who's always walking where he shouldn't. I laughed. You learn to do that by 5th grade. If you don't laugh, they never stop. The last inning of the season, for some completely unknown reason, my grandfather stood up in his seat and started shouting, "Cold beer, right here!" My team was at bat when it happened. I walked out of the dugout and straight to the car. Never said squat to my coach or my teammates or anybody. Just walked to the car and waited for Ma to bring Skelly and drive me home. Thank God school got out a week later, and I could lay low for a couple of months. The end of chapter 4. Great job today. See you tomorrow.